Thank you for joining us this morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jay Deasing and I'm president of the Southampton Association. I've been a member of the association for almost 20 years and president for the past 5. And we've worked on very many important issues during that time, including zoning, taxes, and providing over $300,000 in scholarship benefits for Southampton High School seniors. But nothing has received the strong and quick interest from our members, this community, and the press than the issue of beach preservation and erosion. I think it's because if you're a visitor or a resident, full or part-time, of this community, all of us know intrinsically how critical our beaches are to our love of Southampton. We've inherited, as Dr. Beach will tell you, some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And what we do with that inheritance is critical. So we're delighted to have him come and explain some of the science, because I think any solution that we come up with will start with science. And I can't think of anybody who will do a better job of even-handedly giving us the information that we'll need to make the right decisions going forward than Dr. Leatherman. He has a 40-year record of studying coastal issues, a PhD from the University of Virginia. He's very familiar with Southampton, having studied up here for more than 20 years. And so I'm delighted that he could join us today and at least start a conversation that will hopefully help us to leave a legacy to the next generation, to our children, to our grandchildren, of continued beautiful beaches here in the Hamptons. Thank you, Dr. Beach.
Thank you, Well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the Southampton Association for putting this together and making this possible. Obviously, it's a very controversial issue, and I've dealt with this at many beaches around the country and indeed the world. But let me just say a few things. First of all, as Jay pointed out to you, these are world-class beaches. And I think you have to think in a larger term of, you know, what do you think of, when you think of a great beach, what do you think of? I think of sand and clean water, clean sand, big sand dunes, a beautiful environment, right? But as I travel around the world, what do I see? I don't have to go that far, actually, northern New Jersey, okay? And you see a lot of rock rubble, still concrete on the beaches, you know, this sort of thing. And to me, those are visually obstructive, and in some cases they're doing damage to other people's property, okay? That's very clear. So then you have to think, as Jay said, what is your vision for the future? And someone once told me, I gave this talk, well, I'm only going to live another 10 or 20 years, what do I have to worry about? Well, I think that's pretty short-sighted, because I think most of us want to, as Jay mentioned, you know, pass on to the next generation what we've inherited. Okay, we can say we own the land, but as someone once told me, we're just caretakers of the land, and we want to leave it in as good or better shape than we found it. Now we have a problem, because beaches are not stable. They naturally move around and always changing, and this causes problems with property boundaries. I mean, surveyors talk about meets and bounds, and we have precise pieces of property, and we do, and that's one of the great things about America. We have very strong property rights. That's a great thing. I've been in countries where that's not true. I have friends who've moved down to Costa Rica, which is a great country, but they bought farms, and they found out that there are people encroaching on their property, and the judge says, well, these are poor people, so you know the story. So their laws aren't that strong in some of these countries, even good countries. But we have those laws, and that's a very good thing. But on the other hand, we have to think about what are the beaches. They're also for the public good. And we do have the Donegan patent. I got a copy of it here, which is one of the more interesting documents I've ever seen in any area. In fact, these are actually the most fascinating beaches I've ever worked on. Think about it for a minute. Your beaches, first of all, run largely east-west. Most beaches run north-south, okay? You have beaches here that expand and contract by 200 feet over the winter, right? People who live there see that. And someone said, oh, the beach is wide in the summer. Why? God made it that way for more room for the tourist. Okay, I'm not going to say that in one sense, but in the other sense, I can tell you it's difference in energy levels, right? We get the nor'easters in the winter, which cut and cumulatively cut back the beach. And then when we get a storm like Sandy, well, that set the beaches up, cut them back, and then we had the nor'easters after that. And beaches recover a bit, but not enough. Now, I was just out there walking around yesterday, and the beaches are back, as many places, back 150 feet or so, almost 200 feet in some places. They're recovering. And you won't have complete recovery until about June or July. And I expect the beaches in many places where they had the width to go back to 200 feet or more, maybe 250. That's what we normally see. The problem, as we know, is when we build too close to the water's edge. And people have asked me, are the beaches eroding? And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to show you some data. Well, the answer is, on average, the beaches are eroding here about a foot or a foot and a half a year. Now, that doesn't seem like much, but over time it does add up. But let me just tell you, that is low for United States East Coast average. East Coast average in the United States is 2 to 3 feet per year. But of course, the average doesn't mean anything to any one citizen, right, or any one property owner. And indeed, we did a study a number of years ago, a number of things. One is we did a study of the old life-saving stations. I think I have a copy of that. There's a few reports over there. This is about the Hamptons life-saving stations, and we were able to relocate. Some of them are still where they were, but a number of them we found the foundation to relocate them. And we found from this study, and these were precisely surveyed in, by the way, to the high water line, and we went and resurveyed them. And what we found was, from this study of the old life-saving stations, was there's variable erosion rates along the coast. And some places are relatively stable. So there's not one rate for this whole area. So we have to understand that. And it is variable along the shoreline, and that gets into the glacial geology, inheritance of this area, and a lot of other things. Sand supplies naturally offshore that come ashore. We have areas where, because of the bottom contours, we get focused energy, and we have something called erosion hotspots. One of those is ditch plains. And that area definitely has been eroding over time. Another historical erosion hotspot was what's now the village of the Hampton Dunes, I guess you call it, West Hampton Dunes. Yes, that was traditionally an erosion hotspot. It always had been for a long time, going back in history. And I'll show you a little bit of that data later. So there's obviously, a tremendous investment in the property here, beachfront property. We all know that, and I don't know the exact number, but I know it's in the billions. And we have to think about what's the best approach to deal with the system. The best approach is to leave it alone, let it be natural. Let beaches do what beaches do, okay? And if you look at some of the countries I've been to, Uruguay comes to mind, believe it or not, and a few other countries, they have 200, Australia, 200-meter setbacks. They don't want anybody to build back closer than 200 meters. I was in Western Australia. It was absolutely unbelievable in Western Australia outside of Perth. Big sand dunes, and their setback, as they said, was the whole sand dune. I went, wow. Sometimes a sand dune, these are huge sand dunes that go back more than I ever thought possible. It moved the people back, but that's where the development line is. They say that's all got to stay there. So obviously that we can't look at those days because we've already built what we built. The question is, where do we go from here? And that's what I'm going to talk about. Where do we go from here? In a perfect world, we would have set everybody back. Now, one of the good things here on Gin Lane and Dune Road is a lot of the properties are fairly deep lots. They're big pieces of land and deep lots, so there is an ability to move back, okay? And that would be the other thing I'd say. If you built too close and over time as sea level is rising and the beach is eroding in your area or whatever, it'd be nice, you should be able to move back. I mean, people say, oh, we can't move back. Well, they moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. I understand Michael Bloomberg is moving his house, or at least putting it up, so that he can redo the foundation over here, the new house he's building, or the old house he's rebuilding. So yes, we can move these structures, okay? It's expensive if someone says, well, but so are bulkheads and all these structures. Maybe it'd be cheaper to move back a bit, okay? And preserve the beach, which is the reason that people are living on the beach in the first place. That's my thought. I mean, if you didn't want to live on the beach, you could go somewhere on the sound side and find some bulkheaded area, or just if you just want the water view, you don't have to be here on this gorgeous South Shore beach. So that's the first thing I would say, is that's what what we'd like to have seen, and what we'd like to see people do is move back. Then you have to say, well, what else can we do? And we know that a village, I'm not sure it's the whole village, but Sagaponack, that whole area is doing a beach nourishment project. And I think that's a good thing, really, because the second thing I would say is nourish the beaches. Now, it is expensive, it adds up, and it's not something an individual property owner can really do effectively. And why do I say that? Because you only have a small section of beach, then you're going to have the sand being pulled both ways away from it. You need a pretty good stretch of shoreline to really make beach nourishment effective. So it's not really an option for a single property owner. It's not to say a single property owner can't add sand to their beach, excuse me, to their dune, and try to build that up a little bit of volume. Yeah, that's a good thing. But in terms of beach nourishment project, that's a big undertaking, millions of dollars, sometimes usually tens of millions of dollars. So that's the type of community level, village level, or even larger you have to go after that. And the last thing people talk about, well, we've got bulkheads here. We've had them historically. In fact, we were, at one time through the SOLACA organization, we were starting to compile this information on bulkheads. It goes back, and I got data back here about what's being done to the shore. And here's a Southampton trustees declared the beaches as common in August of 1773. It goes through in 1888 about Shinnecock Inlet, opened up originally, and then all the things are done. And then it talks about Mr. Anderson in 1945 put in a breakwater at Canoe Place Road. You know, so we're putting all this together because there's a controversy, you know, where are all these bulkheads? A lot of them have been buried for a long time. Many of them were built in response to the 38 hurricane. As you know, very devastating here and just almost pancaked some areas. We got photographs, I'll show you a few. You've probably seen them yourself. So I understand the need, I shouldn't say the want or the need to protect your property. And I hate to see it when houses fall in. There was a beautiful historical house on Fire Island that I'd gotten to know some people there, and they said when they built the house, their grandfather built the house, there were 2 dunes in front of it and a wide beach. And then back in one of the storms, it was a nor'easter, I think it was 1991 even, one of those, that the house fell in. And I was really sad they couldn't move it back, but they didn't own the land behind them. The checkerboard was filled. So there was no real place to move the house. It was very sad. I've seen this on Cape Hatteras. A beautiful house in the area of Rodanthe, North Rodanthe, which is north of Cape Hatteras. Again, an erosion hotspot. They built a house called Serendipity, I guess that's the word, Serendipity. And I stayed in there at one time, and they built it for many families. There's 6 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, 3-story wooden building. I kept thinking, why don't they move it back? Because even when I was there, the water was almost coming on the foundation. And they said, well, it's too expensive, and there are power lines here and all that. They should have moved it back, but it fell in the water. Because North Carolina does not allow hard structures. They used some sandbags for a while, bought a little bit of time, but ultimately built an erosion hotspot. And I mean a real erosion hotspot. The erosion rate was 12 feet per year for the last 100 years. That's the reason they moved the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse back. The erosion rate there, we mapped accurately for the last 100 years, was 15 feet a year, on average every year. Now, that's real erosion, okay? I mean, that's just taken away, and there's a reason for that. The reason where the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is built on the wrong side of the Cape. The North Cape is eroding, and the South Cape is accreting, the South Shore. So they didn't know that. And they could have put it over there, and they've been high and dry forever. So, at least as far as we know. I shouldn't say ever, but for a long time. Okay, I just want to make a few comments, and then I got some more to say about all this. But let's look at some slides. I guess we should do that. But I wrote down a few notes, but let's move on to the slides in the interest of time. We look at this shot, and we see some of the beautiful landscapes, see some of the coastal ponds. I know someone's going to ask me about that. The other thing that's fascinating about the shoreline is it has shoreline meanders. It's not exactly a straight shoreline, is it? And those shoreline meanders or humps along the shoreline, we're not sure where they come from. We think they migrate. And that causes some duress for property owners for a short amount of time when you're in an area where it's very narrow. Now, let me just look at the whole story. People say, where's all the sand come from for this area? Well, it comes from the erosion of the glacial cliffs. This is Montauk Point, everybody probably recognizes. And we know this area has been eroding for a long time, and offshore you can find big boulders left behind going out as much as a mile, which says that's how far it was during glacial times. We all know this area, like Cape Cod, was formed by glaciers, right? We all know this is a glacially formed landscape, and that's part of what's called the moraine, with big rocks and boulders. Just a few shots there. This, of course, is a lighthouse. The decision has been made to stabilize it and keep it. I can say that Highland Light on Cape Cod has been moved. The lighthouse on Block Island is moved. Cape Hatteras Lighthouse is moved. Fire Island Lighthouse, they haven't done anything to it. Actually, the spit has grown, the island's grown longer. So the Fire Island Inlet has moved something like a mile west over time. So there's a lot of dynamics going on in shorelines. It's not all one-dimensional. Oh, just a few pictures. That was an old World War II thing. That was my kids when we were small. So, Stephen and Sandra, when they were kids, we were here long ago. And then some of the historical photographs that we have and drawings show it as this. And we know this area is retreated. And it's been said that George Washington, I guess you know, was a surveyor before he became president, or before he became a general and then president. And he surveyed to placement of this Montauk Light. And he was said he moved it back 200 feet from the cliff edge. He says, I think it'll last about 200 years. Now, Alan McFarland is supposed to find that record, and that would be very valuable to find that if that's true. But that would be very interesting. I don't know how you know that. But again, about 1 foot per year has been the retreat of this. So it adds up, but it's not major in terms of erosion rates that we see along the coast, other places. Do you know what the erosion hotspot in the United States is? What state would be the erosion hotspot, the highest erosion rates? North Carolina? Well, that's pretty high with some areas. That's right. They got major problems there. Any other guesses? Florida? No. Florida, actually, we have some areas that have some problems, but Florida doesn't have the waves you have here.
New Jersey.
It's actually Louisiana. The beaches they have there are eroding at rates of 50 feet a year, a lot of them. And there's a reason for it. It's all built on a delta, which is subsiding. So they have relative sea level rise of 1 centimeter per year. So, because the whole area is sinking. Okay, well, we all see that. All on the bluffs here, you know, the erosion's been going on for thousands of years, for at least the last 6,000 years, and supplying sand. You know, this is by something called longshore movement of sand, or longshore sediment transport. And I won't draw all this out. We could spend a lot of time, but there is reversals, but the net direction is obviously to the west, and that's what formed all these barriers. It formed Southampton Beach, it formed Fire Island, going on down Jones Beach, and then finally Coney Island at the end, right? And there are people who have been unhappy with being on the edge here. This is a house I looked at years ago. Some famous person, I forgot their name, movie star, and they did a lot of things trying to stabilize it. I kept thinking, why don't they just move the house back? They kept trying to hold those cliffs. That's a hard thing to do. Now, I won't go into all the geology here, but what's interesting about this curve, which is actually done by Fairbridge in 1961 at Columbia University, he's the first one to put together a curve that said, oh, look what's happening to our coast in the last 10,000 years. Look at the top up there. Well, he thought that sea level has been higher than present. There's a whole lot of controversy about that. But basically, it sort of tapered off around 5,000 years ago. You see that? And got more flat, but still slightly going up a little bit in most places. Well, we know there has been retreat. This is a photograph we found in the archives in Bridgehampton Library, and it shows here a fella, this is back in the 30s or 20s, looking at what is called Marsh Peak. This is where marshes living at one time, and now they're exposed on the beach. And what do you think those tracks are there?
Oxford track.
They were exactly right. Yeah. In fact, they know the gauge of it, how wide it was. It was a different gauge than they use today or something in terms of the width of it. And we've seen other times after storms, I don't know about after Superstorm Sandy, but I've seen places where you do see the peat, that is the old marsh, what's left of the marsh, exposed on the beaches. Again, it is evidence, it's all on the Hamptons, this is evidence that there is retreat. And again, it's not uniform, it's not the same rate everywhere, but there is retreat. And we know we've had a lot of, you know, we've had hurricanes, someone told us once, no hurricanes don't come here. Well, there's something called hurricane amnesia, but there have been hurricanes, and they do come here, and most of them come in this area, not towards New York City. Superstorm Sandy was really an anomaly. It was an incredible conditions under which it made a left turn in New Jersey. We've never seen that happen before. You know, all the damage it did was only a Category 1 hurricane. We call it Superstorm Sandy, only Cat 1, but it was very large in size, and it made landfall. If you look at Long Island like this, New Jersey like this, what does that look like? A funnel. Okay? So the water comes in, the surge comes in, it's constrained by the land, it's got to go up. That's why they got such a huge surge there. You would not see the surge here because we have no funnel here. It's a relatively straight shoreline, right? And there are certain places in the United States that have this funnel shape situation. That's why the Bay of Fundy has the largest tides in the world, right? The Bay of Fundy in Canada, it's like a funnel. As the tide goes from the Gulf of Maine, it's 12 feet, gets all the way up to Moncton, it's 45 feet. Has anybody ever been up there? It's an experience. It's great. You need to do that. Plan a trip. Put it on your to-do list. I went there, and low tide, you're walking on the bottom of the sea. You come down these big metal staircases, and they tell you when the bell rings, you come back. Or you don't come back at all. Okay? So I was like, you know, walking around thinking about when's that bell going to ring, and I wanted to go farther to see, you know, there's little pieces of land with trees on top of them. They're just like, you know, statues sitting out there. And you walk around and you hear the bell ring. I started running back. But then I wanted to see it coming. I want to see the surge coming because you actually see the front of it coming. It's moving 20 miles an hour as it comes in. And then, of course, behind it, the water gets deeper and deeper all the way to 45 feet during spring tides. It is something else. It's what they call a tidal bore. But the reason for that, again, is the shape of the shoreline. The tide is being bunched up as it moves up. Canada is getting narrower and narrower, and the funnel is causing the water to come up higher and higher. And of course, the land is high there; it can't flow over the land at all. Okay, so this is a little bit outdated, but we know that we've had other hurricanes. But this area is fortunately not a prime spot for hurricanes in terms of frequency. They come, but not that often. So we often get something called hurricane amnesia, right? We kind of forget about them, as I mentioned. Okay. This is the 38 hurricane. I think we all know about that. That was the storm of record. And it did a huge amount of damage, as we know. And houses, historical houses there. And as I said, like you, I think most people hate to see this happen to anybody's house. This is tragic. We don't see this on this sort of thing occur. And this is part of you see just the telephone poles are left. You see the telephone poles, and there's the ocean on the left and the bay on the right. Wow. It's devastating. And of course, we know what happened to the Dune Church. The water swept right through it and destroyed a lot of it, and then came right on through Lake Agawam and flooded parts of downtown Village here, just down here in Job's Lane, Windmill Lane. That was a portal for the water to get through. Okay, well, what's been done to try to deal with this erosion problem? And we think you're familiar with the West Hampton Beach dune field, groin field. People call these jetties, but they're really what we call groins. Jetties are what are built at inlets, to be precise. There's no inlet here. So these are rock structures perpendicular to the shoreline, and we call them properly groins. And so there's something like 15 or 16 of them here, and they were built because this area was eroding very rapidly, and they had some political influence at the time. Now, it did help create a much wider beach. People here were happy. They had a double dune, they still do, and everything was good. Except you start looking at the last one. And you see that last one there, and as we come down farther west, things were deteriorating. From the view here, you can see down to looking towards west, towards Mauritius Inlet, and you see the last terminal groin, and you see how thin the beach is there. This is the area which we now call the village of West Hampton Dunes. Most of you probably know this story of what happened in terms of the houses were now on the beach, and that's what it looked like at one time. As they say, the view is getting too good there. Fish off the balcony. And of course, houses were falling in, and it was really sad to see all that happening. But this was caused by accelerated erosion. You put those groins in, it sand-starved this area, and so the people who are affected by the groins were very happy. The people to the west, or we say downdrift to where the sand was moving, they were sediment-starved and had accelerated erosion. Erosion rates went from a foot a year to 5 or 6 feet a year. That's what happened. So some people said, well, and this is the way the village looked. Telephone poles going, all these houses had to be cut off from the power. They were unfit for use, and just, everything's just sort of falling apart. The septic tanks, that's when the health department came in and said, okay, you got a septic tank on the beach, you cannot use this house. You're done. People still wanted to use them, but they were gone. So, really, And then, of course, an inlet came through during one of the, I think it was a winter storm. It was broke through a separate inlet, and that took out a lot of houses. In the whole area, we just lost a huge number of houses. Okay, so we know that story. Okay, some people say, well, let's build, people call it normally jetties, but groins along the entire South Shore. Okay, well, if they were going to build some, they should have built them everywhere. But do you really want your shoreline to look like that? And also, it's not 100%. Because you get a storm, it still sucks the sand out of the jetties or other groins. I'll use the proper term, groins. So they're not 100%. If you go down to northern New Jersey, you'll see that a lot of the shoreline in northern New Jersey all along has these features. And they still have erosion problems. So it's not 100% effective. It does trap some sand. It does help in some ways. But in other ways, I find it really visually unappealing when you have what we see, some people call it the New Jerseyization of a shore. Okay? And I don't think you want to look like New Jersey. You think about it. Go down and take a field trip. Now, if you look at what's been happening along the shoreline, this is a study we did with the Corps of Engineers back in 1979. And I don't know if it's been updated or not, but we went back to the historical, what they call T-sheets that were made by people surveying along the beaches of the high water line. And you can see here some really tremendous changes on the beach. In some places, actually, the bars on the top would say accretion, the bars on the bottom erosion. You can see it's really quite variable where the inlets are, some spikes. But this data set does show you really variable erosion and changes, and I hope this has been updated since we did this work with the Corps long ago. So, we look at these houses, what do we need to do? Obviously, I would say soft solutions are the best. Sand dunes, vegetating the sand dunes, sand fences are good to try to trap the sand. But the best thing, of course, is keep your houses back. Don't build the houses on the sand dunes. And I talked about the life-saving stations. Here's one of them, one of the towers, and we did use that as reference points. We knew where they're located going back through time. This tower survived the Georgica station. And that's how we did some of the studies of the beach changes as well. Here's the foundation. Maybe some have seen this. This is the Bridgehampton. Has anyone seen this one? After storms, you can see the pylons of the Bridgehampton Tower. And of course, the different houses is near Georgica Pond, and beautiful houses. I don't know how the depth of this property is, but you can see it's clearly close. And I guess this is one of those areas in the zone where they're going to nourish the beach. Now, this is a house that I'm not sure exactly where it was, but I remember talking to the guy there, and he built it on the sand dune, and we were asking, why don't you build it back? He said, I want a better view. Well, you can always elevate your house, you know, but keep that sand dune as a barrier, as a buffer. That's what they're there for. Sand dunes serve three purposes. They're a reservoir of sand in times of need during storms. They are an energy dissipator, and they are a surge barrier. So there's three physical functions of the dune, not even talking about their ecological functions, and therefore, to me, economic functions of protecting your house. So why would you want to build your house on that? You can see, as long ago, already sandbags. The pool is drained because it's cracked. The pool cracked. That was the first indication you had problems. Got a call that says, my pool's cracked, so I don't do pools. Well, it turned out to be a little more than a pool. And of course, we've had bulkheads, I think, and I worry about bulkheads in the sense of when they're appearing on the beach. And to me, if bulkheads were allowed, I'd have only the condition that they have to be set back behind the dune, and if they're on the beach, they have to be removed. If they're affecting public use of the beach, and if they're sand robbing or affecting their neighbors, to me, that's the covenant that should be written up between the town or the village and the homeowner to ensure the longevity of these beautiful beaches. So that's the compromise I would give if you want to get to the nub of the thing. If you're going to build, I would not let them build this kind of thing. I would rather see the old wooden type that are more with nature. I hate the rusting steel, I hate to say it. And somehow worse yet is putting rubble in. And I saw rubble out there and rocks and stuff. That stuff's going to be scattered along the beach profile. In fact, I was walking around there, it got a little dark, and I fell down and tripped over some rubble and hit my head on this thing. So I'm okay. Just a little ding up here, a little ding there. And I said, oh, this is great. This is what we don't need on beaches. You know, introducing rocks, everything from boulders down to this size. I didn't bring a boulder, so I couldn't carry that. But to me, if you're going to build these bulkheads, and I'm not a proponent of them, but I understand under some conditions, if they're built behind the dunes or built off the beach, and then if through time the beach erodes, and when you can't keep them covered, and they're affecting public access, and also the aesthetics of the beach. We got to think about the aesthetics. You know, this is not a city. This is not Manhattan. Okay, people come from Manhattan to be out here. If they love Manhattan, and I love Manhattan, they'd stay in the Big Apple and never come out here. But obviously they're coming out here for a reason. They're coming out here to enjoy the trees and the environment and nature and the beautiful beach. So we really have to preserve that, and we can't let that be crowded out. We can't lose that. So my saying is, I think the village or town ought to sign a covenant with these landowners that when these things become a problem, they have to, at their own, at homeowner's own expense, take them out. This is what they have in Texas. It's called the Texas Open Beaches Act. And if your house or your structures, they don't even allow structures, is on the beach, then you have to remove it. You know, Texas, they're kind of tough down there, you know? That Wild West justice. And if you don't move it, they move it for you. Okay, because it's a public beach. And they say, oh, okay. And the law down there says if you have grass, then it's not beach. You know, how we define a beach? It's open sand, right? I was out there and people were rolling out sod on an open beach, taking a photograph, sending it to Austin, the capital. Of course, high tide, the sod was floating out in the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know. I don't think that one washed too long. He may have bought a few months or something till the inspectors came out there and found out the water was washing all the way on the house. It's definitely on the beach. Couldn't hide that too long. So again, people have moved houses here. It's been done historically. I know it's harder to move the brick structures, the stone structures, much harder. Can be done. That takes more money, but you can move back. And to me, that's the thing to preserve our beaches and would be the #1 option. And to me, it should always be the first option. The first thing to do is set your house back when you build it. The second option is if you get in trouble, you're too close, you're having problems, move your house back. The third option is if you have a whole strand of shorelines in kind of an erosional area, then do a beach nourishment project. And the final thing, just to save your house, is to build something, but build it back, a bulkhead, maybe a wood one, but it's got to be far back, and if it shows itself on the beach, you're going to have to take it out. You cannot violate the beach in the end, the public good, the Donegan patent. And also, if it starts causing erosion and affecting your neighbors, obviously that's not good and that's not fair. Okay, well, that brings us back just to the gorgeous beaches you have here. I mean, we have some historical structures on the beach. We see a few here. I guess they're in already, and I know there's some allowance to rebuild things, but I'm looking at some of the original wooden bulkheads here, and I'm seeing these monster things coming much higher. How did that happen? Okay? That was, to me, that's not a replacement. Okay? So again, I think we got some problems that have happened. And again, the Dune Church has moved back, and then, of course, the new foundation. And here's Cape Hatteras. I mean, they tried everything trying to save this lighthouse. These are 2,000-pound sandbags, and you see some metal stuff, rebar on the beach of earlier things. People sold them on building concrete blocks bound together with rebar. And I told the director of the National Park Service, you think this is going to work? He said, well, you know, it's just bad out there. We got to do something. And now you see, to me, that's a lawyer's dream out there. If someone's body surfing, hits those things, and impales himself, can you imagine? I don't know if any lawyers here, or trial lawyers, but you know that's set up, isn't it? To me, that's a done deal. They're going to really get sued for that. Not to mention the problem to the kid or the person who impales himself. Well, there's the Sentinel before it was moved. And here it is being jacked up. And this had 3 million bricks in it. It was the largest lighthouse, 208 feet high, and most famous lighthouse in the United States with the candy stripes. And it was moved back. Well, here's another thing. In Florida, someone used what we call the unpatented Maytag technique. To stop the erosion. They threw everything except the kitchen sink out there, didn't they? Fortunately, that was done in the Panhandle, and you look at the neighbors doing the same thing, something over there. This guy, I guess, I don't know what he had. I guess it ran an appliance store or something. These are trade-ins or something. I don't know what this was, but I saw that, and I just, oh my God. Couldn't imagine anybody doing that to their beach. I mean, if I saw somebody doing that at my beach, I would have the law out there arresting them, right? But it's amazing what people will really do to try to save their house. They'll destroy the property or destroy the beach or destroy the whole area, to me, save their house, not move it back. Here's a private beach nourishment project on Captiva Island, and just north of Sanibel, if you know the area. Beautiful area. It was done with private funds, and it was good because it saved a lot of houses and saved the golf course. So that's important, the golf course. I was also involved in Kiowa Island, helping them with their beach management. They had an interesting situation where they had these big sand spits that grow off, kind of like Fire Island sand spit there. And it was sand starving the green there, the world famous, I think it's the Wild Ocean course. And I said, we're going to have to cut off that sand spit and get it to come ashore, because it just keeps building farther out in the ocean. It's not coming ashore. And eventually they did that, came ashore, and now the beach is back 200 feet wide again. So what they were doing there was really doing what nature would have done. If they had a hurricane or storm, it would have cut that sand spit and that sand would come ashore. But as it was, they didn't have any storms for a long time. It just kept building out in the ocean, and it was really sand starving the ocean course. No houses, but it was the famous ocean course. By cutting the sand spit, it moved ashore. This has been done in Seabrook Island, South Carolina, and they're doing it now in Charlotte Harbor area on the island called Don Pedro, which I'm working on that now in Charlotte Harbor, Florida. Well, that's pretty much what I wanted to say, and I'll take your questions. Thank you.
I'll ask anyone who has a question. We've got a mic here, and if you could turn and face the camera, would help just so that we can get that recorded.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. My name is John Bouvier. I'm from West Hampton. And I had a question about the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and their task with taking outer continental shelf sand and gravel to help replenish the beaches along the East Coast. Are you aware of that? And how do you feel about it?
Well, there's been, the Corps of Engineers has been a primary mover behind beach nourishment, but they, of course, demand that you have public access if they do a project. And there was, by the way, a beach in Florida on the Panhandle that didn't want the beach nourishment. The homeowners were all against it because the beach really wasn't that narrow and they weren't that concerned, but the county wanted the nourishment project because they thought it was going to bring local jobs in and also get your money back from Washington. And it was 65% federal, 25% state, so it was mostly paid for. But they didn't want it because of public access. And they said that's going to put a big public beach in front of our property, and then all of the public's all out there, so there's a whole thing of public access. But back to your question, the resources offshore usually have to be within 6 miles to be economically to move them ashore. And there are sands and gravels offshore. I haven't looked at all the data. A lot of this work was done by the Corps and some recent stuff by the U.S. Geological Survey. But there are sand resources out there, varying quality. Most of the sediment out there is a little coarser than on your present beach, so you have to count on that. And coarser sand means steeper beaches, so keep that in mind. But I'm not familiar with the recent stuff that's being done by the Bureau.
Thank you.
What's your feeling about skimming the beach when the beach is at its highest, like in August? Skimming, because the sand, as we know, goes from east to west, and taking that sand that leaves, pushing that up onto the dune before it goes.
Okay. There have been, I know this has been done here, and so South Carolina and North Carolina does that a bit. I guess the concept there is to try to build up the volume of the dune, okay? But you have to realize you're not creating any new sand. In fact, structures don't create any new sand either. Groins and jetties and all that sort of thing, they don't create any new sand. They just redistribute it along the beach. So you might help yourself a little bit with maybe catch some more that might go down drift. The only advantage of that, as I can see, is to kind of build up the volume you're doing a little bit. But remember, you're not creating new sand for the whole system. So it's rob Peter to pay Paul in some cases.
Question. As far as replenishing the beach, bulldozers, as the gentleman just mentioned, pushing it on the beach. I have a small company called Dune Saver, and I found, through watching this stuff getting done, that there actually is no integrity to that sand. I think it's too porous, it has too much air mixed in with it as they're putting it on the beach. I found that, through effective snow fencing, or beach fencing as you call it, the sand actually is able to collect and interlock because it's a multifaceted mineral. And the stuff that's being dumped on the beach has no resilience to the waves. And a second point, in which if you could comment on it, I've noticed that I mentioned about the ox. I was the one that said oxcart track. Years ago, there was an erosion after a storm right next to Cooper's Beach, and it exposed oxcart tracks into hoops. That's why I was able to answer the question. And what they did was they put in a rock revetment in front of the property. And in the years following that, I noticed that across the street, the neighbor was having serious flooding problems. So I want to ask you, do you feel that by destroying the integrity of that bog, you're actually allowing the water at high tide to migrate through the beach and through that bog and causing problems landward?
Well, you asked a number of questions here. First of all, most of the flooding here comes really from rainfall. And we've had some very wet springs. And I remember one year I was doing some work at Georgia Pond. They called me up and said, our basements are flooding. And everybody was very upset. And so I went up there, and the Georgia Pond Association asked me to come and take a look at it. And you'd had, this is years ago, this is probably 15, 20 years ago, tremendous amount of spring rain. And that's when those coastal ponds fill up. And it turns out that people who'd built their houses around the Georgia Pond had also built them during a dry year. And they had 3 or 4 feet of water in their basements. It was terrible. I mean, you imagine standing water, and some people were away, they weren't there at the time, their sump pumps weren't working. I can remember the caretaker for the Spielberg property says, there's so much water in the yard we can grow rice. So, people were very unhappy, and someone was a wine collector, had a wine collection, and the labels came off the bottles. And the caretaker had a big lump of labels. We can't tell the difference between a cheap $500 bottle of wine and the real good stuff. Oh my gosh. So it was really hectic. But to get to the bottom of this it's really mostly precipitation in terms of, and that's the way, and of course these ponds are let, as the Native Americans did, the Shinnecock Inlets, dug them out, and this is for the fish runs, but also to get more salinity in there for the clams, and also to lower and I guess we're doing it now to lower the water levels in some ways in some of these ponds. So, and there's a pipe, that lets Lake Agawam drain more continuously. But I think that's the major problem there. I'm not sure, we'd have to look at that particular case of the bog, but I don't think that's going to have too much effect on it. It does form kind of a perched water table at times. But the other thing is, you're right, when the sand's pumped ashore, it's very loose. And if you had vegetation hold the sand and had the roots, it's more resistant. But keep in mind, when we get a big storm, there's so much energy, it doesn't matter. It's going to erode that stuff. I mean, that's the bottom line. And you try to do your best. And it is going to hold it better. And you want a dune. I gave you the 3 reasons to have a dune as protection to your property. The functions are well done. But ultimately, the dune can only last for so long, depends on the volume of the sand and how long the storm lasts. And hopefully the storm doesn't last too long. The worst storms are the ones which last for many days, like the Ash Wednesday storm of March 1962. 5 high tides. The low pressure set out there and sent waves ashore. We had it for 3 high tides in the so-called perfect storm of 1991. We call it the Halloween Day storm, but it's now called the perfect storm because of the book. And that, again, was 3 high tides. And so really, for erosion, you get your most erosion from nor'easters than from hurricanes. Why? Because the hurricanes go by so fast. They don't have enough time to really erode away that beach. It takes time to continue to move that sand offshore. But the thing is, where's the sand going? It's mostly going offshore to build a big sandbar because the beach profile is getting flatter. and that's how they break, basically it's an energy dissipator. And then we get the return of the swell type waves, the big surfer type waves. It drives all that shore back, sand back ashore, and recovery occurs. And so you have a very dynamic beach here, changing 200, and during storms 300 feet. That's why I say you need a minimum 300 feet. From the studies I've done here, between the dry beach, you need 300 feet of dry beach minimum is what you need here. And we should be setting the houses back even a little bit more than that. That's what we need. And that way you're not going to have the conflict. That way you can maintain the sandy beaches. You don't have the expense of dealing with erosion problems. And we don't have the controversy.
Rob Allen, Southampton Village. You're obviously familiar with the area. We have the good fortune in the village here. We have almost 400 years of historical records. We know where the dune used to be. We know the ponds that have been reclaimed. We're also fortunate that we have the Dongan patent. When you look at what's happening, particularly with the structures that were built to reinforce this winter, is that really just a failure of public policy? We have more than enough information to make good decisions, but we're not. And if we fast forward with all of that historical information about the dune movement with those structures, where are we going to be in 100 years?
Even 20 years or 10 years. Well, you're absolutely right. I was talking to someone and they were telling me, it's really hard to get a permit to do anything around here. Okay? And yeah, and they said, okay, they were just going to wait till the storm comes, then we can do it on emergency provision. And that's exactly what's happened, hasn't it? The DEC says, okay, we got to, everybody, do what you need to do. Well, this area was hit, but it was not hit hard like the city and Jones down Coney Island and really northern New Jersey. You got a glancing blow. I mean, what added to it was the winter northeasters. After Superstorm Sandy, northeasters kept taking more and more sand. But that's what they said, and they were right, weren't they? Unfortunately. And I think it is a failure of public policy that, and I understand it in one sense, but was this really an emergency? Did you have the situation we saw in northern New Jersey just wiped out? No, you didn't have that. Okay? You had some houses threatened. Did any fall in? Did any houses fall in? One in Wainscott? Oh, that's bad. Sorry to hear about that. But again, most lots are big and they're deep and you can move them back. And that's really where we need to be. But again, if in some cases you can't. If you can't move them back, and then I would say in the worst situation then, and I think one of the structures I'd have to take an exception would be with the Dune Church. I mean, it is a historic life-saving station. It is an iconic feature here in the village and in fact all along Island. It is a church and it is a protector, part of the protection for the village of Southampton from a surge coming through like the 38 hurricane. And there are bulkheads either side of it. So that's one of the places I would say, okay, build it back behind the dune, and where the dune ends, where the church stops, put a wooden one there, just to maintain that plug so you don't have that happening. And it's for the Dune Church, but it's also for the betterment of the village. So that's where I would say there would be but again, I think you understand where I come out on bulkheads. I don't like structures. I really don't. I don't like to see them on beaches. And when they are on beaches, I think they ought to be removed.
Hi, I'm Tom Blades. We live here in the village. You mentioned that out here the beaches run east to west. When you have on the shoreline built one of these obstructive bulkheads, where does it cause the erosion? Equally on the east side of it and the west side, or more on one or the other?
Okay, here's what happens. When we have, in the wintertime, the storms come and nor'easters come out, as we know, we call them nor'easters, come out of the northeast. So they're driving the sand hard from east to west. But in the summertime, we get squalls and other waves coming from the west, the southwest, and it drives the sand the other way. So you can have it both sides, either side, but predominantly it's on the west side. That's where the biggest problem is going to be. But if you have the waves coming the other way for a period of time, you can see erosion on the east side too. This happens, and we see that with the Georgia Pond groins there. And people will say, oh, I'm okay. No, sometimes you're not. It's going to cut into your side as well, but mostly downdrift. That is to the west.
Hi, my name is Linda Munn, and I live in the Village. A couple of the new structures look like they intended to actually resemble a new dune. So, because it gracefully kind of goes up. I'm wondering if that was intended to actually resemble what nature might have done, and that wouldn't have as bad of effect as those bulkheads that shut out.
Okay, in the design of seawalls, which are much more massive structures built to protect cities like Galveston City, the old design was a straight wall. And these things go down 15 feet, and they're concrete, and they're, 3 or 4 feet deep and reinforced concrete. But now the new structures are curved. And the reason for that is that doesn't allow so much wave energy to bounce off the structures. It's called reflection. You get a lot of reflection off seawalls, which does accelerate the erosion from the seawall. So the curved structure causes the wave to go up and more break on itself. But remember, if the beach is eroding and you put any structure there, sooner or later the two lines are going to come together and be no beach, right, by definition. So it is a better design in terms of wave energy dissipation during storms. But if the beach is eroding in your area and you have a solid structure, it's not moving, sooner or later the beach is pinched out of existence.
So they're just as bad as anything.
Well, I would say they're better than,
Neighbors.
well, they might cause less problems for a while, but when they stick out on the beach, the day that happens, I say there's the day they got to be moved.
Hi, Charles Nanda. I'm resident that was off Shinnecock Inlet. Have you any ideas about that? When I was a boy, we could go swimming equally as with equal depth on the Peconic side as on the Shinnecock side. And now the Shinnecock side is filling with so much sand from the inlet that you have to pretty much go almost half a mile out to get into deep water. And I hear that the whole bay is filling with sand. And I saw the devastation after the last storm, so I'm wondering. And sort of the second part of that question is, there was so much clamming and mussels that were off the beach that we could eat a meal just by going down to the beach and picking stuff up. And now there's absolutely no evidence of mussels, but there still are a bit of clams. Can you respond to that?
Well, to answer your question, it's interesting. I looked at a lot of historical records, and again, a very rich history here, exceptional. And another reason that makes this area so fascinating to study is you have historical record, is that Shinnecock Bay, at one time when the inlet was open, historical times was a harbor of refuge. Means they could get those big ships, sail ships in here. Can't do that now. So you're right. The inlet, being stabilized as it is, has allowed a huge amount of sand to come in, and that's the reason you have such another erosion hotspot, East Quogue and to the west of that. And there have been beach nourishment projects there and the Corps and all sorts of things. That's a huge erosion, another erosion hotspot is just downdrift west of the Shinnecock Inlet, because so much of that sand that should be going there is gone into the bay.
There were breaches on the other side, right? Where it went right into Tiana.
Right. So, correct.
You said that, I'm Bill Michaelchek, I have a home in the village. You said that you'd gone down and walked on the beach yesterday. Given what has been constructed recently, what do you think we can expect over the next few years from these constructions?
Well, as I said, I saw a structure going up with a lot of rocks, boulders, and stuff this small, and I was just astounded that that's allowed, because I think about what happened to Cape Cod National Seashore, and I used to live in Cape Cod, and the National Park Service had the most popular beach is Coast Guard Beach in Eastham, and fantastic beach, and they had the National Park Service had the major parking lot and pavilion and bathrooms and everything there, and they built it in the wrong place, again, an erosion hotspot. And it was cutting back, and so the National Park Service built dunes for a while, and as those washed away, they decided, we got to do something hard that won't wash away. So they found out that they could get concrete rubble from Boston. They digging up the sidewalks all the time, putting in new lines or something. Oh, free rubble. So they had it trucked down to Coast Guard Beach, and put it on the beach and put it along the shore there. And some of it had rebar sticking out of it. Oh my gosh, that's bad. But at any rate, they tried to bend that down. And it had all this rubble, different sizes, some mostly much bigger than this, but some of the huge pieces. They put it out there, and after a few big storms, they pulled it out in a beach profile. It didn't stay there. And now, here you take a beautiful sandy beach, soft sandy beach, where you fall down, you're not going to do this to your head, right? Then they said all the visitors were, kids were falling down, hurting their heads, and they said, oh my gosh, we got liability. We got to take it out. It cost them 10 times as much money to take it out as to put it in, because they kept fishing for it. After each storm, they had people down there go out there, and if more would be exposed to fish it out, because they realized we are really messing up the beach. And I'm just astounded that this is going on, putting this rubble. To me, that's the worst thing to put on a beach, because you know that can't stay there. You know it's going to be moved around. It's going to be on the beach profile. It's going to be out there on the beach where you're trying to body surf, or kids are body surfing. I mean, that to me is astounding.
Nancy McGann, Southampton Village. I have a question regarding West Hampton Dunes. A group of us went over there to take a look at the beaches and how wide they are now after Sandy and the additional nor'easters. I was under the impression that the groins that were put in there after that breach, that terrible breach, I think in the early 90s, and it had stopped at a certain point, and then they had that huge breach, and then they got together and continued those groins, which were mostly under the sand except after storms, and that helped build the beach over there.
Okay, you're talking about West Hampton Beach, the groins that filled. Oh, they were in before 1991. I'm trying to...
I told they were put in afterwards, but I'm...
Oh, no, much earlier than that. I forgot the exact date, but those go back. Do you know, remember?
1950s, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 1965 was the actual date. Oh, no, they've been there a long, long time.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Nancy Grabowski. Stephen, I want to thank you for coming up here today. I know you helped the town quite a bit with our public education effort regarding hurricane preparedness. The question that I have, am I correct in understanding that you said that both the state of Texas and the state of North Carolina have state legislation that would prohibit such structures? And secondly, do you know whether we have any such legislation in New York State, and or whether maybe we should be looking for New York State to assist us with that process? Thank you.
Well, in North Carolina, it is a state legislation. You cannot have hard structures. They do allow sandbags, particularly to help people get by storm conditions or severe winter. I think that's a good thing because they can be moved, taken out pretty easily. So that's a semi-hard, or you know, people call that sort of a, but still kind of a structure that can be moved out very easily, and that they allow that. But they don't allow you to build bulkheads or groins or any of that sort of thing, or put riprap or rocks or rubble on the beach. That's not allowed. In Texas, this is on the ocean shoreline now. If you have in the bay waters and other areas, they have different rules. But on the ocean sandy shoreline, in Texas, they do have the famous Galveston seawall, built after the 1900 hurricane. And as you know, in 1900, a category, we think is a category 4 hurricane, hit that area and killed 6,000 to 8,000 people. It overtopped the whole Barrier Island and drowned those people most, and destroyed many of the buildings, most of them. Some did survive. Some of those Victorian age buildings survived and are still there. You go down to the city and see it. And after that, the Corps came in and built this massive seawall for 10 miles, and it has protected them from destruction from subsequent hurricanes. Now the problem is when they built it, it was built 200 feet back from the then water line, and now you can fish off, for years you can fish off the seawall. It's deep water. They've had to put rubble in front of the seawall to protect the seawall from falling in. So you get all that. But the beaches to the south have eroded very fast. I have friends who have houses there, and they got a hammer in Hurricane Ike. And most of the houses are wiped out because they create an erosion hotspot to the south and west of that big seawall. And the other thing is, the water comes in the inlets and floods Galveston from the backside from Galveston Bay during some of the hurricanes. So I'm not sure, did I answer your question? Or I remember for Texas, I know what you said. So in Texas, they had the Open Beaches Act. And therefore, except for this, Galveston, of course, is already set. But for the rest of the shoreline, pretty much they don't allow any hard structures. They have one erosion hotspot where they had to protect the intercoastal waterway. It's a beach called Sargent Beach. And it was really erosion hotspot. It was breaking through, shallowing up the intercoastal waterway, and they couldn't stop it. There's no houses there, so they put a structure there. The state did that to protect the intercoastal waterway. They had to do that. And then a lot of the beaches down there in Texas, you know, they're Mustang Island, Joseph Island, no one lives on them. There's no bridges to them. They're privately owned until you get down really to South Padre Island and Corpus Christi area. And then you got a lot of development down there, and people go there for the winter.
So no hard structures in Texas?
No, except for those exceptions I just mentioned. Oh, North Carolina did allow one exception to protect a Civil War fort just south of Carolina Beach. It's called Fort Fisher. And the foundations and fortifications of the Civil War embankment were eroded away. And again, there's no houses there, so they did build something to protect that because the whole thing was going to fall in and you would have lost a historic structure. So that was an exception North Carolina made.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Leatherman, Bob DeLuca with Group for the East End. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming, and thanks to the Southampton Association for having you. I just wanted to see if you could help us drill down on some next steps. You had mentioned earlier the state of New York and this sort of haphazard emergency permit management, which I would completely agree with. But as we know, the village of Southampton is giving the individual permits on the individual properties, and what you presented today has pretty much been known for 30 years about hard structures. So I'm wondering if you could help people here who are in the village know what to tell their elected leaders about, you know, if we don't change direction, we'll end up where we're heading. And how do we start to change the direction to a more progressive coastal plan for this village before we're out collecting rubble off the beach at high tide? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. I know what I try to do today is try to lay out a balanced approach, because some people say, oh, people who are hard-hearted and want people's houses to fall in. And I know some people actually applaud when houses fall in. And I'm not one of those people. I know people who own those houses, and I don't want them to fall in. I see that as a huge waste and a huge tragedy, not for the structure itself, but also those are homes of people. They have they have history there. They, you know, sometimes they go back to families. So I don't want to see that. So I'm trying to come up with a compromise, you might say, you know, but I think it has to be accepted on both sides, and it has to be enshrined in the law here, be it state of New York or the village or both or whatever, where you've got to protect the public beach, the public good. Okay, but you can allow people to protect their property if, to an extent, like I said before, but when those structures, hard structures, are impinging upon the public use of the beach, the beauty, the access, or cause an erosion to adjacent property owners, then they should come out. They've got to be placed farther back. They've got to be pulled out. To me, that's the bottom line. That's where I draw the line in the sand.
How do you feel about the four-wheel drives and the campers that are continually riding up and down our beaches?
Well, that's a whole nother issue and a whole nother talk. So I don't think I better get into that right now, because that's very controversial, and that gets the whole thing into everything from the ruts and from nesting shorebirds, and I've done work on that on Cape Cod and Fire Island and other places. But I have to tell you a little story on Fire Island long ago, which took my breath. I was out there, and there's a state park on the very end called Democrat Point on Fire Island. And I was talking to a reporter, and I thought, it was kind of interesting. I thought he told me that he drove his Jeep through an area and it was nesting turns. They said violation, nesting, don't drive through here. He said, oh, it was just a little barrier. I went right through there. I said, oh my gosh. Now this is years ago. Years ago. I was working on Fire Island. I first started working here in 1977. I was brought in by the National Park Service to help them with that area. So when I was living in Amherst, Massachusetts at UMass. So a long time. I'm an old guy, right? Shouldn't have told you that. Okay. But at any rate, so this reporter says to me, he says, you know, I drove through there and suddenly all these birds came up. It was like a white tornado, all these birds, all these least terns and piping plovers. It was awful, you know, and I kept driving. And I said, well, what stopped you? He says that the Jeep overheated. I had to stop. Does anybody know why his Jeep overheated? He had birds stuck in the radiator, couldn't get any air. Completely, every little body's in the whole thing. So I don't want to go there today. We need to keep back on this topic.
Dr. Leatherman, my name is Chuck Eos. I've been here all my life. Every time I hear you talking about the north-south shore in Jersey and Virginia and wherever, it doesn't relate to our shoreline. We have a chance here. We have east and west movement. And if we put groins in front of those east and west movements, we can build the beaches like West Hampton has done. We may have to add some materials, yes. If we do it rapidly, we'd have to add materials. If we took our time, we got, right now, the Shinnecock Jetty is built way out. You could probably skip a couple of groins and start at Munn's Point or something with a groin and build that beach and then work your way to the east. Now, you should be talking about the potential of saving us here, not North Carolina or New Jersey. It's an entirely different condition, and you know that.
Okay, well, you're right. There is some east-west shoreline, North Carolina, south of Cape Fear.
There are some.
There, and also you have Long Beach. Long Beach has groins and jetties.
And what's the other 90% or 98%?
Well, as I said, most shorelines run north-south.
The pictures that we've seen are north and south.
Well, I showed you a lot from this area too.
Okay.
The point of it is, beaches, that is an unusual direction, but the coastal processes still are the same. You still have sand moving on and offshore. We see it today. We see it coming back ashore. We still are affected by sea level rise. We're still affected by this transport of sand on and offshore, and groins don't stop that. Jetties don't stop on offshore transport. They can't.
They do a pretty good job of.
They catch longshore transport.
That's what I'm talking about.
That's right. You'd have to build them, if you were going to build them, you have to build them along the entire reach of the Hamptons. And then you'd have to fill them up with sand and maintain them. And you'd have to be happy with that kind of shoreline, if that's what you want.
It would probably take 5 groins in the village of Southampton.
No, you'd have to do it continuously. In fact, that was the original core plan, was not to just build 15 of those there. The whole plan, if you look at the famous or infamous Fire Island Inlet to Montauk Point plan, and I was involved in that. I did a report for the President's Council of Environmental Quality on that back in 1979 or something. So I know, I'm very aware of that project. There have been 2 generations of engineers that have retired off that project. Okay? It was in the wake of the '62 nor'easter. But the plan called for groins along the entire South Shore. But only 15 or so were built in West Hampton Beach, and they got it because of political influence. But then the Corps is pretty much pulled away from those hard structures. It's hard to get. I mean, the Corps is really only in the beach nourishment now, as far as I know. You'd have to get special permits to do that, and I don't know anywhere they're building groins anymore. That's not something they're doing. California's still building seawalls, and not really bulkheads, seawalls, to protect the bluffs, where they have houses up on the bluffs. And there's a big controversy about that. That's one named Catherine Stone, a lawyer, has come up with the idea of sand rights. Because she's saying, she lives in sort of central California, they're building all these seawalls, and they're having demonstrable effects downdrift because that's where a lot of sand comes from, erosion of the cliffs and the other beaches. So there's a big problem there, isn't there? Okay, in fact, if you were to concrete up your seawalls, your cliffs here, you would see a lot more erosion here. If that were done in Montauk and all the way down, that would surely have a problem. And there was a plan by the Corps in the old days of wild speculation of building things. They were going to take the, Cape Cod looked something like this. They were going to put a concrete wall on the entire outer Cape Cod. This before the National Seashore came in. Everybody says, even the old Cape Codders said, no, 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 we love it. Okay, it is eroding, but it's beautiful. We don't put a concrete wall there. So, no, it's, if you wanted to do that, if that was a plan people wanted, I would not think it's, to me, it would degrade in my ratings your beaches. If you put groins along the entire coastline, well, just going down to New Jersey, take a field trip. It is a different orientation, but the coastal processes are the same. They are the same. They got transport along the shoreline, they got onshore, offshore, and alongshore. So it's the same, and the waves are actually bigger here than New Jersey by and large.
Good morning, I'm Anna Thronholst. I'm the supervisor here in the town of Southampton, and You are obviously touching on an issue that we as an entire region are dealing with, and as you know, we've had the good fortune in a big part of town to enter into a public-private partnership with a number of our homeowners that are in partnership with the town undertaking a major beach renourishment project. And as fortunate as we are to have that project before us now, we are also dealing with some of the history. And I think one of the funny things about what you showed with the dishwashers and is that, you know, we very recently uncovered a whole bunch of old cars, Studebakers and the same, that had been used obviously for the very same purpose. But what all of this speaks to, I think, is that we need to work together with all of the municipalities, all the villages, all the towns that dot the shore, going from east to west. Because unless we have a region-wide plan where we understand what is needed, mile by mile by mile, we are going to be the victims of what happens on either side of us. And that, to me, is the important part of understanding the science that is coming before us, both today and the science that has come before us with the specialists that have been working with us as we're developing the beach nourishment project. But understanding that that's what we need, and we need the public-private partnership here. It can't be a conflict between homeowners and municipal governments. It has to be a partnership amongst all of us. So that's something that we want to keep moving towards and working towards. And, you know, I welcome anyone who wants to participate in that project. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I totally agree with that. You need that partnership. You need that covenant. You need people to clearly understand, and the true property owners to be here, not the people who are maybe managing some of these estates. I think the real property owners need to be here and meet with them, because sometimes I wonder if they really know what's going on. You know, I work with some people who are fairly well off, and I rarely ever talk to the real owners. I talk to their people. Okay? And their people sometimes are well-meaning. I say, well, you know, if you really thought this, oh, well, that's what he would want, or that's what she would want. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure if they thought and had all the information that that's what they really would want. Okay? So, yeah, these are billionaires. I've worked with them. I still do. And I think that you need to get those people to talk with them, not their people. Okay? Their people can come along and learn too, but I totally agree with you, and I appreciate what you said. You need the partnership. You don't want to get into a war. You don't want to get, you know, lawsuits going. I mean, that'd be good for lawyers, I guess, but that's not good for anybody to go that way. We need to look at what we're trying to preserve here, why are we coming here? Why is this a great place to come, and why aren't we going somewhere else? Why people decide to stay here and live here and enjoy this, or come here for their summer vacations or for getaways from the city? There's something bringing people here, something very special. I don't think you want to lose that.
Bill Patrick. About 6 weeks ago, I went over with Chuck Eos because he wanted me to see the situation in West Hampton. And subsequently, a group of us, Nancy McGann and a village board and others, went over, and Aaron Takunian showed us the situation there. And the thing that was unmistakably impressive, and I beg anyone in this room who has a home near the beach or on the beach, get in your car and go on over and see West Hampton. You've got to see it. Now, I also know what happened on the lee side there years ago, but I was told by Aaron Takunian, I believe, and he's here, he can correct me, that, you know, they say it only hurts when you stop, and in this case, where you stop, that they added a few other groins, and they did what seems the most basic thing, is they tapered them. They got shorter and shorter so that the impact on the west side came down. But one of the things, not only were there beaches, you know, a month and two ago, 150 yards deep, there was no scouring. The dunes have built up over the years. There are treble dunes everywhere. And the other thing that was unmistakably important, the big problem we have here in the village, is that there's no sign of any bulkheads. I don't know if they don't have them over there, or if the beaches have just built up to the point where you ain't never going to see them again. The other thing that I thought was intriguing is that the groins, you know, they may sound terrible, they're almost a quarter of a mile apart. So you have huge beaches. You have to have a beach buggy to go and see more than one groin. Don't get the impression that every 100 yards there's a seawall. And the other thing that I would just guess, and I'm going to pursue it with the mayor of West Hampton, I think that West Hampton's going to be here for another 200 years and without a darn problem. And I'd like to get in that boat. Thanks.
Well, as I mentioned, that is one approach. You'd have to build them everywhere. And again, I was on the panel that said you had to taper the groins, but remember, those people downdrift are getting a government guarantee to maintain their beaches for 40 years with beach nourishment, and that's already cost tens of millions of dollars, and it's going to be a lot more. So that is not a total solution, sir.
Well, one last thing as far as Southampton Village is concerned. The jetty at the Shinnecock Inlet, I wish I brought my overhead photograph that I have of it. It's really an astonishing thing. It sticks, you know, it almost hits South Africa. It sticks out so far, and so that the benefit to the village of Southampton extends, I think, for maybe a couple of miles, at least 3 miles from that jetty. The beach right where the jetty is on our side. Now, when you look, by the way, the overhead photograph shows West Hampton. This was taken 10 years ago, and West Hampton got bombed. But just looking at it, it looked to me like they shouldn't have just built one huge jetty on the east side of the inlet, and then they built a big jetty, but only half the size of the one on our side, and it got badly sculpted out, and this time with the hurricane it washed over. But I'll tell you, if you go down to Little Plains, if you went to Little Plains 3 months ago and 2 months ago during all these northeasters, and you're 1,000 yards from the end, there's not a thing there. And I'd like to know what we in the village are supposed to do, because if next winter comes and we get another hurricane or another series of northeasters, it isn't just going to be the beach houses that you got to worry about. Some other people are going to take it in the nose. But I'm telling you, West Hampton is high and dry, and if you're here and you care, go see it.
Well, I think everybody should go see it. And go down to Long Beach, too. See what's happened. Go to northern New Jersey. See what's going on. Northern New Jersey's had them for a long time. And they also not only have jetties and groins, they also have bulkheads and seawalls, too. So it's not a perfect solution, and it's going to be very expensive. And, yeah, keep in mind, yeah, you can hold the sand, but better. Definitely does trap the sand better than not having the structures there. No question about that. But you have to decide, is that the way you want to go? Is that the way you want your beaches to look? And do you want to pay the cost of it? Because I doubt the Corps is going to pay for something like that at this point in time, unless everybody builds huge parking lots around their houses.
I'd just like to add one more thing to that. I have been to Long Beach, and those groins are very close. I mean, it's not a quarter of a mile away. When you're in West Hampton, you can barely see them from one groin to the other. I was absolutely amazed at how those beaches were built up. Having seen it when all the homes went into the water, I think our village, we're very concerned about our village. And I do agree, if we do it, we have to do it all the way.
You have to do everything. You have to do the entire stretch of shoreline.
Steve, welcome back to Southampton. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Aaron.
You know, among other people, I really appreciate the way you explain science to people, because it gives everybody a real opportunity to access things that are sometimes just too dry. So I think it's wonderful that you're here and that you're talking to us about the different options in front of us. What I'd like you, if you have a minute, to talk about what happened in West Hampton Beach and West Hampton Dunes. You know, the photos you showed from 20 years ago were at the worst it was. And in that 20 years, you know, through a combination, as you can explain, I'm sure through structural changes in beach nourishment, that area has changed substantially. The other thing I think is very important for people to understand, and if you could compare and contrast for everyone, the difference between groins and jetties and seawalls. I mean,
okay.
They're very different, and people sometimes tend to confuse
Okay.
them.
Well, first of all, let's start off with the easy thing. What's the difference between a groin and a jetty? People use those terms interchangeably, but a groins are, both of them are shore perpendicular structures. They jut out in the ocean. Jetties are only built at inlets. They're to stabilize inlets and hold them, make them navigable, but they actually damage downdrift beaches. So they're damaging to beaches. There's no question about it. Just look at the area downdrift of Shinnecock Inlet. Look at the beaches downdrift of Mauritius Inlet. Shinnecock's a bigger inlet. There's always been an erosion problem there, always pumping sand there. Corps' always got some project there. It's never ending, okay? Guaranteed employment, okay. Now, how about groins? Groins are not built at inlets. They're all about trying to stabilize the beach. They're built along the beach, again, shore perpendicular, jutting out from the beach, and their purpose is to collect the sand that's moved along the shore, called the longshore sediment transport, and this is due to waves that come in from an angle. Most waves don't come straight on. If you're out there, you probably will see them coming at a slight angle, and that generates a current. If you're out swimming, you feel that current. Sometimes it's pretty weak. A lot of people say, I don't know if there's a current, but I've heard people go in the water and come out and say, who stole my towel? Well, the towel's down there. They were just slowly moving along the beach and didn't realize it. Well, at the same time, sand's moved along every day. So, and I forgot the numbers exactly here. Aaron, you probably know them, but it's a huge amount of transport here. It's something like 450,000 one way and 300 the other. So it's 450 this east to west and 300 west to east, a net of 150 west. That is a huge amount of sand. Down in Miami, I say our beaches here move by 200, 300 feet during storms. Down in Miami, it's more like 20 to 30 feet. We don't have the waves down there. We have the Bahamas that blocks the big waves from the nor'easters. The only time we get any real beach erosion to speak of is when we have a hurricane. And those usually come by so fast, we don't even get that much erosion, even from hurricanes. Okay? So that's one thing. Seawalls are a totally different category, and bulkheads. They're built parallel to the shore, right? And they're there to protect the property owners behind them. They're not there to build beaches. They don't build beaches. They're there to protect whatever's behind them, the upland, or the inland areas, the landward areas, okay? Now, you're right. I haven't been down there, the village of West Hampton Dunes for a while, and I know that that area is being maintained by the Corps projects, Nourishment, and if they didn't, that is an erosion hotspot because those groins, it would erode. But that's a special deal, and that was a special deal because they had a lawsuit and then incorporated the village and did that, but that's not going to happen again. The federal government's not going to bite off on that again. It's not going to happen.
Well, I'd like to thank Dr. Leatherman. He's been generous with his time, and he will stay for a few moments. I think we know we're not going to come up with a solution today, but I think that what we're coming up with is a start of a dialogue, and I think that that's really critical to evaluate the options and to make sure that we're basing our decisions on science, not emotion, to make sure we have the facts before we make assumptions that certain things are in place, that certain things are happening. And so I appreciate everybody showing an interest and being here today. So thank you very much.